Before we continue, let me ask you a very direct question. Have you ever felt like your money just evaporates? Like it hits your account, you breathe a sigh of relief for a few hours, maybe for a few days, and when you look again, it's gone. And the worst part isn't even that. It's gone. The worst part is you can't explain how it's gone. You didn't buy anything crazy. You didn't travel. You didn't upgrade your phone. You didn't do anything reckless. And still, the balance disappears. Like there's an invisible hole sucking everything out. And then the anxiety starts. That tightness in your chest, that quiet question you try not to think about. Am I the problem? Now I'm going to tell you something that might sound strange at first. Sometimes having a little money saved can create more anxiety than having nothing at all. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but hear me out. When you have nothing, there's no fear of losing. You're already at zero. But when you manage to save 1,000 reais, 2,000, 3,000, something changes inside you. You start to feel fear. Fear of spending, fear of needing to use it, fear of watching that amount shrink. And suddenly, what should bring security starts bringing tension. You start checking your balance all the time. You start imagining problems. You start creating disaster scenarios. And this is where a lot of people get stuck, because money stops being a tool and becomes a constant source of alert. Your brain goes into defense mode. That's not an exaggeration. There's a part of your brain that reacts to the possibility of losing money, almost as if it were a physical threat. It's like something is about to go wrong all the time. But there's a specific point, a threshold, where that feeling changes. A number where your brain stops operating in survival mode and starts operating in rational mode. And when that happens, you stop making decisions driven by fear. You start acting with clarity. You stop reacting and you start planning. And that's why what I'm going to explain here has nothing to do with complicated spreadsheets, has nothing to do with some wild investment scheme, has nothing to do with making 10,000 reais a month. It has to do with understanding why your money disappears and what's happening inside you while it's happening. Because if you leave this video now, you're going to keep thinking the problem is lack of discipline, lack of control, lack of willpower. And it's not. The problem is almost never willpower. The problem is that you're playing an emotional game without realizing the rules. And while you don't understand the rules, you always lose. Now, let's talk about the real feeling. That specific day of the month when your paycheck hits, you open your banking app. You see the amount there. You feel a little relief. Sometimes even a little pleasure. That feeling of now it's going to work. And in the first few days, you even try to do things differently. You think this month you'll be organized, that you'll control things better, that you'll write everything down. But then life starts happening, a bill you forgot, an automatic payment, a small grocery run, a snack that seemed harmless, a subscription you barely use but keep paying for. Nothing feels big enough to be the villain of the story. And that's exactly the problem. Money doesn't disappear because of one huge decision. It disappears because of dozens of micro decisions that go unnoticed. And every micro decision is emotional. You don't buy something only because you need it. You buy it because you're tired, because you're frustrated, because you want to reward yourself, because you feel like you deserve something after a hard day. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to feel better. The mistake is not realizing you're using money as anesthesia. And anesthesia works in the short term, but then the pain comes back. Only now with interest. There's a quiet pattern almost nobody notices. When you constantly live with very little money left over, your brain goes into scarcity mode. And when you're in scarcity, you don't think long term. You think right now. You think about easing immediate discomfort. And that makes you make decisions that feel small, but keep you trapped in the same cycle. It's not stupidity. It's not lack of intelligence. It's mental exhaustion. It's overload. It's living with the constant feeling that any unexpected expense could turn into a disaster. And when you live like that, you're not making strategic decisions. You're just trying to survive the month. Now let me touch a sore spot that almost nobody likes to admit. Sometimes money disappears because you avoid looking at it. You kind of know how much you make. You kind of know how much you spend. But you avoid facing the real numbers because truly looking means taking responsibility. And taking responsibility is scary because if you look and realize you're spending more than you should, you'll have to change. And change takes energy. But that avoidance has a cost. The more you avoid looking, the more mysterious money feels. And the more mysterious it feels, the scarier it becomes. And the scarier it becomes, the more you avoid it. It's a perfect cycle of... Another thing nobody talks about is the quiet shame. That feeling that everyone seems to be doing better than you, that everyone travels, buys things, upgrades their car, renovates their home, while you're trying to understand why you can't make it through the month in peace. You start comparing yourself. You start thinking you did something wrong in life, that you chose the wrong career, that you waited too long to get organized, and that comparison eats away at your energy. Because on top of dealing with tight money, you're carrying guilt, and guilt kills clarity. When you feel inadequate, you don't make firm decisions. You make impulsive decisions, or you avoid deciding. There's also the common mistake of thinking the problem will fix itself when you earn more. It seems logical. More money, less problem. But here's a truth few people accept. If you don't change the structure, extra money will disappear too, because the pattern stays the same. If you live on autopilot, any amount that comes in will be absorbed by the same disorganized system. It's like trying to fill a bucket with holes. It doesn't matter how much you pour in, it will always leak. And this is where the shift begins. Money doesn't disappear because you're incapable. It disappears because you don't have a system that works when you're tired, anxious, or distracted. You're relying on willpower every single month. And willpower is limited. It runs out, especially when you're already drained from work, family, responsibilities. What changes the game isn't promising you'll be more disciplined. What changes the game is creating a structure where the right decision happens even when you're not motivated. When you understand that an emergency fund isn't just a number sitting in an account, but an emotional stabilizer, everything starts to make sense. It's not only for emergencies, it's there to turn down the volume of fear, to let you think before you act, to keep a small problem from turning into a snowball. When you have a minimum structured reserve, you don't panic at the first unexpected expense. And when you don't panic, you don't make bad decisions. But I'm still not talking about specific amounts. Because before talking about how much to save, you need to understand where what you already earn is going. Not in a complicated way, not with massive spreadsheets, but with brutal clarity. You need to see the leaks. You need to accept that small repeated expenses carry huge weight. You need to notice that every forgotten subscription is a decision you keep making every month without realizing it. And you need to understand that organization isn't about suffering to control every penny. It's about creating clear limits so you don't have to decide all the time. Imagine if, on payday, your income was already automatically divided into parts with specific jobs. One part that pays fixed bills, one part that goes straight into a reserve you don't touch. One small, intentional part for fun without guilt. When that's automatic, you don't depend on your emotions in the moment. You don't depend on your mood that day. You don't depend on the promise you made to yourself at the start of the month. You create an architecture that works for you. And here's the point. Almost nobody realizes when you stop fighting money and start organizing its flow, anxiety goes down, not because you got rich, but because now there's predictability, and predictability calms the brain. Money stops being a constant threat and becomes a logistical tool, a practical problem, not an emotional one. But that takes a difficult decision. It takes stopping treating yourself like someone incapable and starting treating yourself like someone who just never learned the game correctly. You weren't born knowing how to organize money. Nobody taught it simply in school. So it doesn't make sense to carry that guilt like it's a character flaw. What makes sense is admitting that up until now, you were improvising, and constant improvisation creates instability. If your money disappears, this is for you, because the problem isn't only financial. It's mental. It's structural. It's emotional. And the good news is, structure can be built slowly with simple steps, without radical moves, without cutting everything that brings you pleasure, without living in extreme deprivation. The secret isn't suffering more. It's deciding better. And deciding better gets much easier when you're not operating in panic mode. In the next part, I'm going to go deeper into exactly how to build that structure in practice, how to identify invisible leaks, and how to build a foundation that makes your money stop disappearing without you having to become a different person. But before we continue, I need to ask you something important. Do you want to keep living month after month trying to guess where your money went? Or do you want to finally understand the mechanism behind it? If you're seeing yourself here, Stay with me until the end. Because once you understand what's really happening, money stops being a mystery and starts being a tool you control. Money doesn't disappear out of nowhere. It doesn't vanish because of bad luck. It doesn't evaporate because you're cursed. It leaves quietly, hidden behind small decisions you repeat without noticing. And the most dangerous part is that those decisions seem normal. They seem justifiable. They seem deserved. You wake up early, work all day, solve everyone's problems, come home tired and think, I at least deserve this. And that this can be different food. A small installment purchase, a new app, a sale that looks like an opportunity. None of it feels big. But the problem was never one big decision. The problem is automatic repetition. There's something called decision fatigue, which is when your brain has made so many decisions throughout the day that it starts choosing the easiest path. And the easiest path is almost always the one that gives immediate pleasure. When you're tired, you don't want to think about the impact at the end of the month. You want to solve right now. And right now almost always costs money. Do you see how this has nothing to do with being unintelligent? It has to do with energy. And when you live on the financial edge, you also live on the emotional edge. Because any extra spending feels like a threat. But at the same time, you feel like you need small rewards to get through the routine. It's a constant internal conflict. Part of you wants to save. Part of you wants to breathe. Now, pay attention to the pattern. You get paid. You pay some bills. You feel a bit in control. Then the small outflows start. You still don't worry because the total still looks comfortable. But you're not tracking it. You're on autopilot. By the time the middle of the month hits, the balance doesn't look so good. Then the internal alarm starts. You cut back on a few things. You get more tense. You avoid opening the banking app. And in the last days of the month, you go into survival mode. Counting coins, delaying purchases, praying nothing unexpected happens. And when you get paid again, you feel relief. But the cycle starts over. That's not simple disorganization. That's a full emotional cycle. It starts with hope, moves into relaxation, slips into carelessness, falls into tension, ends in anxiety, and hystarchy. Now, let me show you something that changes the game. As long as you keep making every decision on the fly, your money will keep disappearing. Because deciding on the fly means deciding with emotion. And emotion is unstable. What you need isn't more daily control. It's fewer decisions throughout the month. Imagine that on payday, before you do anything else, a portion automatically goes into a separate account you don't use. Not to invest in something complicated. Simply to get it out of sight. Because what your eyes don't see, your impulse can't reach as yet. Another portion is already set aside for fixed bills, and what's left becomes your real spending limit. See the difference? You're not trying to be strong all month long. You're building a system that protects you from yourself on weak days. And here comes an important point. When you look at a full balance, you feel a false sense of capacity. You think you can, that it works, that it fits, but that amount isn't fully yours to spend. Part of it already has a destination. When you don't separate it, your brain interprets everything as available. And apparent availability creates impulsive spending. Now, I want to touch on another quiet issue. Sometimes money disappears because you're trying to maintain an image. Not necessarily for others, but for yourself. You want to feel like you're doing? Well, that you're moving forward. That you're not falling behind. So you keep certain standards that may no longer fit your current reality. A type of consumption that matches the person you want to be, not the person your income allows you to be right now. That's painful to admit, because it feels like going backward, like accepting less. But in reality, it's strategy. There's a huge difference between living below what you can to build something bigger and living above what you can to maintain a momentary appearance. The first is uncomfortable at first, but brings stability. The second feels good fast, but keeps you stuck. And here comes the most freeing part of all. You don't have to cut everything. You don't have to become the person who never goes out, never buys anything, never does anything. That's unsustainable. What you need is to set a conscious limit for pleasure, an amount you decide you can use without guilt. When you define it beforehand, spending stops being self-sabotage and becomes a choice. Most people have never set a clear limit for their variable spending. They pay the bills and then just live. And living without a defined limit is like driving without knowing how much gas is in the tank. You only find out when the warning light turns on. Another thing that makes money disappear is the lack of an annual view. You think month to month, but life doesn't happen only monthly. There's an annual tax, there's school supplies, there's maintenance, there are gifts, there are medical appointments. When you don't prepare for predictable expenses, they become emergencies, and emergencies mess everything up. And here's an important shift. A real emergency is something you can't predict. But a lot of what you call unexpected was totally predictable. It just wasn't organized. And when you start creating small funds for those expenses throughout the year, you drastically reduce the feeling of chaos. Now, breathe and think with me. If your money disappears today, it's not because you're incapable. It's because you're living without financial architecture. Everything is mixed together. Everything depends on your mood, your memory, and your willpower. And that's way too fragile. When you create clear divisions, when you automate part of the process, when you consciously limit what can be spent, you start to feel something you may not have felt in a long time. Real control. Not that illusion of control at the start of the month. Stable control. And when control shows up, anxiety goes down. And when anxiety goes down, you make better decisions. And when you make better decisions, money stops disappearing. But I want to go deeper still, because there's one last crucial point you need to understand before we move into fully solidifying this change: financial identity. A lot of people carry a silent sentence inside themselves that's never been questioned. I'm not good with money. That sentence becomes an identity. And when it becomes an identity, you act according to it. You confirm it. You prove to yourself that it's true. But that's not destiny. It's a narrative. If you've repeated the same pattern for years, your brain is simply used to it. Changing requires repeating a new pattern until it becomes automatic. At first it feels weird, it feels forced, but then it becomes normal. Money doesn't have to be a ghost that shows up at the beginning of the month and disappears in the middle. It can become an organized flow. It can become a tool for peace of mind. It can become the foundation for bolder decisions in the future. But that starts with a simple commitment. Stop treating money as emotionally chaotic and start treating it as structural. Now that you understand, money doesn't disappear because of bad luck or lack of intelligence, but because of a lack of structure, the question becomes, how do you create that foundation without becoming a slave to spreadsheets, without living obsessed, and without turning your life into suffering? The first change isn't financial. It's mental. You need to stop thinking of money as something that comes in and goes out and start seeing it as a flow that needs direction. Money without direction always finds a place to escape. And usually, that place is impulse. If you want it to stop disappearing, you need to decide its destination before it decides for you. On the day the money hits your account, you can't just look at the balance and feel relief. That's the most dangerous moment of the month, because that's when you feel most comfortable relaxing. And relaxing without a plan is the start of the leak. The rule is simple. First you organize, then you levy. Organizing means dividing, not mentally. Actually dividing one part for fixed bills, one part for variable expenses, one part, even if small, for a reserve you don't touch, and one part intentionally to live, go out, breathe by something you like. When you do this right at the beginning, you completely change the rest of the month because you stop looking at the total balance as available. You start looking only at what's inside your spending limit. That drastically reduces the invisible disappearing act. Now let's talk about the reserve, but the right way. A reserve isn't just money sitting there. A reserve is future peace bought today. It's the difference between a problem becoming a scare or becoming a crisis. When you have nothing saved, any unexpected expense becomes a threat, and a threat triggers desperation, and desperation leads to bad decisions. Rushed installments, expensive loans, using overdraft as noble. But when you have even a small reserve, something changes inside you. You think before reacting. You negotiate better. You choose calmly. And here's the central point. The reserve isn't about the amount. It's about the psychological effect. At first, you might be able to save only a little, and it can feel insignificant. But the initial goal isn't the number. It's creating the automatic habit. It's proving to your brain that you're capable of building stability. Over time, that amount grows, and there comes a moment when you notice something different. You no longer open your banking app with fear. You open it with awareness. You don't avoid looking at your balance. You know exactly what's happening. That changes your posture. And when your posture changes, your decisions change. Another important point is to stop treating an income increase as an automatic lifestyle increase. Every time you earn a little more and immediately increase your spending, you stay in the same emotional place. The anxiety stays. The pressure stays. The secret is to increase your stability standard before you increase your spending standard, because stability builds confidence. Spending creates momentary pleasure, and momentary pleasure never fixes structural insecurity. Now I want to speak directly to you who feels ashamed of your situation, who sometimes compares yourself to other people and feels like you're behind. The truth is, a lot of people who look organized live in the same psychologies with bigger numbers. The chaos isn't in the amount. It's in the lack of a system. You're not late. You just never had a clear structure. And the moment you create that structure, even if it's simple, you start to feel something very powerful. Predictability. Predictability reduces anxiety, reduces internal conflict, reduces guilt. You stop living in panic. You stop feeling like you're always chasing. You start feeling like you're building. And when that feeling shows up, money stops being the enemy. It becomes a tool to solve problems, a tool to make better choices, a tool to say no when you need to, a tool to say yes with awareness. If your money disappears, that isn't a sentence. It's a signal that what's missing is direction, not capability. And the transformation starts with 3 simple decisions. Divide before spending, automate what you can, and treat your reserve as an emotional priority, not as leftovers. It's not about becoming a different person. It's about stopping living on autopilot. Because on autopilot, you repeat patterns. With awareness, you build results. And if you've made it this far, I want you to realize something very important. You don't need to fix your entire financial life this week. You need to start structuring this month. Just this one. Organize your income, set clear limits, create the first step of your reserve, and watch how your anxiety responds. Real change starts with the feeling of control, not the amount accumulated. If this video made sense to you, if at any moment you thought that's exactly what happens to me, then do this. Hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel, because here we talk about money the real way, the way nobody explains, and comment the word control down below. If you made it to the end, comment control, so I know you truly want to stop watching your money disappear and start giving it direction, because when you take control of the flow, the money stops disappearing and your mind finally rests.